When the smoke clears, we're still standing.
Bulldog 3-3, patch 8 November, fire for effect, over. Enemy OP on hilltop, over.
When the smoke clears, we're still standing.
Welcome, everybody, to Everlasting Veteran Season 4 in our new studio. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Lynette Nusbacher to the studio. She is famously known for Discovery Channel's Mysteries of the Abandoned, but she also has expertise in so many different fields, having attended University of Toronto, achieving her BA in economics and a master's in war studies, PhD in history from Oxford, logistics officer in the Canadian Armed Forces. The list goes on and on. You are a very intelligent person, well-spoken, and a great individual overall. And that's why I have invited you to come on the show, because your positivity emanates from you all around. Welcome to Everlasting Veteran Podcast.
Thanks very much, Ryan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so before we kind of dive into Mysteries of the Abandoned and kind of getting into that, where did your start for the military and strategic planning and logistics, where did the love for that start?
Oh, geez. That is a difficult question. I commissioned into the Canadian Army when I was already in my 20s. So I did not go in as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old. And I'd already worked in the university sector. And at the time, I was really interested in the history of war. I'd done that as an undergraduate. I'd been interested in it when I was young. And one of the things I saw was my friends moved into areas of life that they thought were the right place to go. They went into business. A lot of people back in the late 80s would go into a big company, and they would think that a job with a big company, just like our dads used to do, was the way to a secure future. And one night, we were all sitting around the TV as a bunch of students. In 1987, we watched the stock market crash. And one of the messages we took away from that, we were done, we stood up, we walked away, and we said, geez, that secure future, that is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And, so what I ended up doing was joining the Canadian Army. I went in as a reservist, went in with an infantry battalion. I was paymaster, looking after the soldiers at the most basic level. And I stuck with that. Eventually, I transferred to the British Army. And I stuck with the idea that you've got to do what's interesting, what fascinates, what catches your imagination, because otherwise you will be miserable for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, a lot of people don't realize you were born in New York. You have U.S. citizenship, and you have this vast perspective on life from many different cultures and countries. And it's phenomenal to be able to have you on the show, to be able to get that perspective, and especially with our veterans in the U.S. We only have kind of our perspective, for our community as U.S. veterans. We've served with other countries on deployments and stuff like that. But to be able to talk to somebody that's served in multiple different capacities with different countries, and now you're living in the UK, and, when you FaceTimed me, beautiful scenery, by the way, it definitely kind of sparked my interest even more to get in depth of who is Lynette, what is she all about. And, your background is phenomenal. And everybody that has ever watched Mysteries of the Abandoned understands that you've done your research, You're a knowledgeable person. And it just speaks volumes to the historian that you are and the professional that you are. So how did life, kind of the journey, bring you to the UK? I mean, that's you were born in the US,
Hmm.
then to Canada, then the British Army, and now in the UK. How did that all come about?
Wow. Um, I went to Canada to go to university. So I was 17 years old, graduating from Alderdice High School in Pittsburgh, PA. And the best university I got into, and the one that was the most cost effective, was the University of Toronto. And when I went up to Toronto with my dad on the first day of the session, my dad drove me up from Pittsburgh, and he met up with an old friend of his who was a doctor in Toronto. My dad was a doctor in Pittsburgh, and she said, "I've got a job for you." And so, any ideas that I had that I was going to move hundreds of miles away from my folks and live my own, no, none of that. So within a few months, my dad was living in Toronto, and then when my sisters finished high school, my mom moved to Toronto, and suddenly I've got to go around their house for supper and be a proper child of my parents. It was great, of course. Family is so important, but
Yeah.
it was not what I expected. Um, I was in the workforce for a number of years before I decided to do my doctorate. And I've got to credit my dad. My dad said, "Don't be a lawyer. It's boring. What you need to do with your humanities degree, with that history and economics degree, is you need to be a scholar." And he made it clear to me that I would be supported by him. And later, when I got married, my father-in-law also likewise supported me to do the degrees I needed to do to be a scholar. So the Canadian Army sent me to Royal Military College. The Canadian Army sent me as a young-ish officer to go and do my master's degree. And I did some really interesting jobs with the Canadian Army as well, in Ottawa, writing doctrine. It was great. And then with my almost finished doctorate in hand, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, the premier leadership institute on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, with a respectful nod to Annapolis and maybe West Point as well. But Sandhurst wanted a military historian. And I had a military history degree from the University of Oxford, and I was going there, and I did. And I can't say that they always liked my North American directness and outspokenness, but I had 8.5 brilliant years there. So the thread through this is I wanted to do the best degree I could in war studies, and I did that at Royal Military College in Canada, 2 years as a master's student. I wanted to do the best degree that I could in history, and I went to Oxford and I did that. And what is significant throughout is some people grow up being told by their families that aspiration is not for us. My family sent me a very clear message. Aspiration is for us. Aspiration is for you. Set your eye on the stars and we will help you get there. And they followed through.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one big thing is, definitely having a good support network, but also, we talked about before we started the show is mindset. Mindset is key when you're going into anything, whether it's, business, degree fields, studies, whatever it is, you have to be determined, and have a good mindset and good mental health to be able to see it through to the end. You're going to hit hurdles along the way and there's going to be bumps along the road. And you're going to be thrown those curveballs in life that you're going to feel like it's going to knock you down, and you got to get back up and just align yourself back up with what your main goal and objectives are and keep pushing through.
And those are core military values, aren't they?
Yeah.
fighting through the objective. I mean, when I was in an infantry battalion, that was the kind of thing that our senior officers would tell us, not only on FTX, that's the kind of thing our senior officers would tell us in garrison, in the office, doing the admin. Don't just get to the goal, fight through the objective.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those great things that I've seen, you on the show, and how direct and deliberate you are in sending your message, not just for as a matter of fact, for each episode that you do on Mysteries of the Abandoned and the history of, I find it very interesting. But when you do your studies with war and strategy, and, I did, the research of, your interest in national and international matters as well. Um, it's one of those things where it is important to pay attention to, I think, even more so right now in today's era with everything going on, because I think it can have an adverse effect on your mental health, uh, personally and with your family. And you have to learn how to not allow it affect you, but be aware of it as well.
Something that's really important is understanding the value of structure. You mentioned strategy. I'm a strategist not because I have a strategic mind, but because strategy provides the structure to combine ends and ways to achieve means. Correction, to combine ways and means to achieve ends. And that kind of structure is what helps all of us get past any of our obstacles, even if the obstacles are in our own minds. And taking a strategic approach, a problem-solving approach, and a collaborative problem-solving approach to getting things done, I think, is really important. So I had a client of mine, a strategy client. I do corporate strategy a lot. And I had a corporate client call me up and say, I've got a Lynette problem. And I laughed. I said, what's a Lynette problem? And he said, we've got this ungoverned idea and we need to put a fence around it. And I said, wow, I did not know that was what I do. But really, and this comes back to our backgrounds in the armed forces, one of the things we learn to do is analyze a problem, analyze it using structure, analyze it dispassionately. When I was teaching young officers in the British Army, one of the things we brought in was the 7 questions. And it replaced the old ideas of battle procedure. When I was young, I learned the 16 steps of battle procedure. And there was a time when I knew a mnemonic for rattling them off one by one, right? We turned it into a set of 7 questions. And every young officer and every NCO in the British Army, they do this in real life. When there is a problem, tactical problem, an operational problem, an admin problem, you just start asking yourself these 7 questions. And then when you get to the end, the last question you ask is, what has changed? And that then becomes the first question of the next time you're asking those. These are using structures to take the wild and woolly, ungoverned world where we live and turn it into something that our brains can deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know what you're talking about. It's one of those things that you can apply with leadership and everything as well, because, when you effectively make changes, you have to go through those lists. And at the end, was it effective? Did it make a change? And then start back over. And that's forward progression, and, if you apply that to even your small business, you're going to be successful, because what works, at a big level, you can downsize it to a small level and work it just the same. The biggest thing that I find, with transition out of the military, there's multiple different facets, and it's extremely different on multiple different levels. Everybody's transition is different. And I have this new thing of trying to change people's mindset of not thinking of it as a singular transition, because there's multiple different transitions when you're getting out of the military. The singular transition is the fact that you're physically not in the military. Your contract has ended, you know. Then, for me myself, I'm going through a lot of VA appointments right now. And this is years down the road. So, you know, I got out of active duty in 2012, and I got out of the military completely from the National Guard in 2017. And we're in 2024 now, and I'm still, now going through VA appointments, and stuff like that, and benefits and, everything else. So don't think of it as a singular transition in a one part of time in your life. You have multiple transitions that are going to be extended throughout, a decade or so, and having that mindset, that military mindset, you don't want to lose what you've learned. And I found that, myself included, you don't forget, you just kind of don't use it, and as an NCO in the military, you kind of get in that mindset when you're leading soldiers and taking care of them and taking care of yourself. You get that structure going, you have that plan of action, you follow through with your mission. But then when you get out of the military, it's like you don't do the same thing, but that's your new life. That's how you operated, right? So if you don't operate like that, then you feel lost, you know? And I didn't realize, that until I tried to kind of push it away of not in the military anymore. I'm a civilian, you're never fully civilian. That's why they have veteran status, you're never going to be, because your mind has been altered based on your training and experience. So you have to understand and accept the fact that it's a new you, and you have to operate maybe not at the same level, but apply those tasks, those drills, those teachings that you learned in the military into your personal life when you get out. And I think it will help, like you said, when you strategically plan things out, things come together a lot easier.
You're right. One of the difficulties of transitioning out of military life into civilian life is some of your support structure disappears. One of the things that really disappears is the kind of high grade leadership that we often expect in the armed forces. When we get bad leadership in the armed forces, we really notice it. My friends who are still serving, the US Army, for instance, when the personnel system messes them about, I'm not swearing on your show here, Ryan, when they get messed about by the system, they really feel it. They feel betrayed. It sticks out like the proverbial sore thumb. When
Right.
you go out into Civvy Street, one of the big transitions is that you are working for people who often don't know how to lead, don't have good management support structures, and perhaps most important, they don't care about you. We're
Right.
so used to the idea that the platoon commander is telling you to take your boots off and checking your toes, which is a fairly humble gesture. When I used to teach officer cadets, I would tell them about this, and I'd put a big picture on the screen of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. And I would say, this is the humblest gesture you can do. And you do it because of your love and care for your soldiers. You may have to get them killed in the service of national policy, but you will get them killed loving them and looking after them and doing your best by them.
Yep.
And when you've got a civvy boss who doesn't care about you, or it can be an ex-military boss who doesn't care about you, but the first time you encounter that, it's like it's a bereavement. A part of yourself is left behind, and you have to mourn that. And that's true about a lot of things about military life. When you're a soldier, people know who you are, how you fit into structures, how you fit into the world, into your world. You wear clothes that signal this. There are semiotics theorists who write books about the symbology of our cultural interaction. Well, when you're in the Army, you got your rank right there on your body. When you're wearing service dress, you've got your resume there on your body. You've got the hat and the thing. Everybody knows exactly who you are, and that helps you know exactly who you are. When we strip that away from people and chuck them out into the civilian world, where all of this is very ambiguous, we do people harm. It's hard to transition.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you understand, with your experience in the military, and you completed the Defense Strategic Leadership Program at Cransfield University. I'm not, I don't know much about that program, but I know that any type of a defense or military leadership course is going to go very in depth of how to properly manage, not just manage, but care for personnel. And the biggest part is, caring for the personnel. Anybody can manage, personnel. That's an easy task. That's like doing the books financially for something. You know, Anybody can do the managerial tasks needed in a position that's created in a company or whatever. But actually being a leader, and you know, some people are, they say natural born leader. I do think that leadership is not, you're not just completely born with it. You may be born with more charisma than others. And then when you're taught, very fine leadership skills, you become a great leader. But I don't think that you're 100% born, with just everything, needing to know about how to be a good leader. And it's life lessons in a combination of studies, to be able to actually effectively be a good leader and want to be a good leader. That's the big takeaway too.
So I developed a program for the British Army on officership. And officership is a term that the American Army had already adopted and that West Point had made itself the center of excellence for. That is, understanding what an officer's job is and how it differs from a non-commissioned member of the armed forces. And we had, at Sandhurst, we had reason to develop that program for ourselves. I'll tell you one reason. Because the adjutant general found himself over and over again opening up his morning newspaper and seeing that one of his officers of whatever gender was having an affair with one of his soldiers of whatever gender. And he considered it rightly to be a big problem when our people didn't know how to keep it zipped with their own subordinates. And so the adjutant general, quite a senior figure, came to his leadership academy, came to Sandhurst and said, teach my officers how to be officers. And I'll tell you why this is especially important. The British officer historically was an aristocrat. You'd have, Lieutenant the Duke of Dunstable. And as British society became more egalitarian, more equal, we stopped having dukes and earls as officers all the time, although of course we certainly got loads of them. And instead, we had to have regular people learn how to be leaders, people who had not gone to a school where they had told them that their excrement doesn't stink their whole lives, where they had been prepared to be some elite creature. And there is a difference in philosophy between American leadership and British leadership culture. The people in the US will tell you that if you get a bright kid and you put them into West Point, if they've got the aptitude to succeed at West Point, you put them there, you give them a 4-year civil engineering degree. At the other end, you can also have a leader where there was no leader before.
All right.
And what we did in the British Army was we had 13 months to work with, not 4 years. And we started with the idea that we had to find somebody who was already a leader and turn them into our kind of leader. And it's a huge difference in leadership philosophy. It's a difference in officership philosophy.
All right.
And it's the kind of thing when you watch old movies, old British war movies, you can see the difference. You can see the officers and the soldiers, they speak in different accents. You can see Michael Caine in Zulu up on his horse telling the less aristocratic officer to carry on making his mud pies while he goes off hunting cheetah. And it's different in every army, but the core idea, as you say, is you take someone who is not capable of being the officer we need, and you make them the officer we need and that we deserve and that our soldiers deserve to be led by.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's multiple different, I agree with you. There's multiple different roads to be able to reach that achievement of having a great leader. But then it also goes back to the 7 questions, and being able to, self-reflect, as you go on as a leader, and continue to grow in that leadership position for, your subordinates and everything else. You have to continuously grow. Just because you obtain, that leadership status and be able to be in that position, it's forever evolving. And I think it's important. Anybody that becomes even an entrepreneur, and starts their own business and has a very small company and they have workers, you're essentially a boss, but at the same time you can be that leader for them, and it's very important to forever evolve and self-reflect on yourself to grow.
I remember every time I have failed one of my people. I remember every time that I, as an officer, failed a soldier or an officer who worked for me. And I remember every time I failed someone in the civilian world who was doing a job for me. And it's hard not to beat myself up for it. And to some extent, I give myself a smack. But some things, like looking after people the way they need to be looked after, like leading people the way they deserve to be led, and big picture officer ideas like being an ethical person. That's not just an officer thing, that's an everybody thing. Everyone needs to be the most ethical person they can be, I think.
Right.
And it's a constant, you use the word evolution. You said evolution. It's a constant evolution towards an aspiration to be an ethical person, to be an honest person, an authentic person, somebody who is transparent. What you see is what you get, polite, considerate, but authentic. And part of that also is understanding our failings, taking them into account, taking them in our stride, and always knowing that we have to do better. There's a corporal I had working for me. One day I'm going to run into him on the street, and I'm just going to fall down on my knees in front of him and say, "I'm so sorry. I did not give you the evaluation you deserved." And he's going to look at me and go, "Don't know what." And I said, just please forgive me, right? Because we are never as good as we need to be. There's that beautiful, beautiful phrase that your reach should exceed your grasp, or what's a heaven for? You should always be reaching to do better, but you can't beat yourself up. You shouldn't beat yourself up when you don't quite make the grade.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes that plays a part into, people look at their downfalls of not, possibly attaining some achievements. Maybe it wasn't your time to obtain that achievement, at that moment, but you may be able to still achieve it. And people sometimes take it, I've done it myself. You take it a little bit harder on yourself because you really, really wanted to obtain that achievement. And it can affect you mentally if you're too hard on yourself, you know. And I'm one of those people where, for years I would try to do everything all at once because I just wanted to get it done. And I knew A to B, or A to Z, what needed to be done. And I just wanted to go, 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 burn myself out. And then I don't achieve my main objective at the end. And then, I feel like a failure, and I beat myself up, and I've learned over the years that, you have to hit the small achievements along the way, take your time, because the big, larger overall achievement in which you want to achieve, you have to take the time, hit the smaller achievements along the way, and enjoy life. You know,
Well,
it's easier said than done sometimes.
it is. And also, there's a generational aspect. I don't put a lot of store into the whole baby boomer, Gen X, millennial thing. But my mom grew up in the 30s in a working class neighborhood, shall we say. Perhaps the word slum might also apply in Brooklyn, New York. And she grew up in a deprived area. She herself grew up as a poor kid of one immigrant parent, one native New Yorker parent. And it was a hard scrabble existence. And it was the Depression. And that kind of upbringing created a demanding person. And a lot of us, I think, grew up with demanding Depression era parents. And all the respect that the silent generation deserves. But sometimes those expectations can be really difficult for us. And when I left Oxford with my degree, a friend of mine pointed me towards a group that becomes a Facebook group called the University of Oxford, where your best hasn't been good enough since 1189 or something like that. And we have to allow our best to be good enough. And we have to forgive our parents for where they came from. And we have to create the futures that we deserve.
All right. Very well said. Now, how do you think, let's go kind of into like recent times right now, because I do think it has, some play, not 100%, but, some people just, they completely tune out, turn off, the TV, the radio, whenever it has to do with national news, local news, stuff like that. I have a lot of mixed feelings. I am not, going to say back or forth or what my opinions are, but I do think that it does play a role with media, government, and the impact of society over the years with mental health in a country, whether they're in war or not. How do you think that people can navigate their lives being informed, but also mitigating kind of false narratives that get thrown out there sometimes?
What is truth?
Right.
Asks, was it Pontius Pilate before washing his hands? It's really important for us to understand that being informed is one of the prerequisites for living in a democracy. And when you look at the founding fathers of the United States, we see people who were brilliantly well-informed, analytical, critical people, thinking men, thoughtful people, and occasionally even thinking women. Though God knows they tried to keep the women out of it. And we have to aspire, we who live in liberal democracies where everybody gets a vote, we have to aspire to earn that vote. And I think about my great grandparents, some of whom came to America from some of the real hellholes of the world, from undemocratic impoverished, horrible places where feudalism still reigned. And one of the things that they dreamt of and one of the things that they believed in was the idea that for them to vote in a democracy, for them to be citizens of a democracy, they had to be informed citizens. And they read the newspaper. They learned English as fast as they could. They read the newspapers. My granddad used to swear by the New York Post. Every word in the New York Post was true. And sometimes our ability to trust is at war with people's deserving our trust. And I know a lot of journalists. I know professional journalists who have got ethics, who believe in learning the truth and reporting the truth as much as they can. And I have unending respect for them, for excellent editors, for people who seek the truth and put it out there. When I grew up in Rochester, New York, going to school where we got the New York Times every day and we were expected to read it in social studies, one of the things we learned about was how they aspired to be objective. And they don't always get there, but they always aspire to objectivity. So without singling out any news outlet, what I want to single out is the idea of journalists, whether they're citizen journalists or professionals, who seek out the truth as best they can and communicate it as best they can. And we as citizens of democracies have got to seek that as well. And here in England, where I live, I've run for office for my political party. I support my political party. I don't always agree with my political party. And the newspapers that support my political party, some of those English tabloids are astonishing in the way they approach the truth. But we have to keep an eye on that aspiration, because otherwise we can't have democracy. And if we don't have democracy, well, then my great-grandfather might as well have stayed in White Russia or in Transylvania, because we don't deserve to govern ourselves. And there are people who think that governing ourselves is cheap and that autocracy is just as good as democracy. And I don't have to be here to tell you that's a bad idea. You read the Federalist Papers, you will see people who understood that even the fine English monarchy of the 18th century, with more or less educated people trying more or less to do the right thing, you still get tyranny if you don't work at it all the time. Sorry, yeah. This is me giving you a lecture. Of course, I was a lecturer for so many years. It's so hard for me not to lecture.
No, it's good. I love all, and that's why I welcome you on my show, because you're a plethora of, information and knowledge. It's amazing in the perspective, and that's a big thing, and it kind of a new thing I'm adding to the show. I want to make sure that everybody has perspective all around. I've started it from the beginning, with different guests, and this is a U.S. veteran podcast because I was in the U.S. Army, but at the same, and you can obviously see I have a lot of military stuff. This podcast studio that's here, it's memorabilia and stuff that I've had or acquired, and but perspective, it doesn't matter if you're in the military or not. Perspective is going to help you and better your life, whether you're in the military or not. If you don't have a different perspective from somebody else, you may not agree with it, but at least you're not closed-minded to a small world. You're able to open your mind and see the bigger picture and make the judgment yourself, and I bring up the whole media and governments and stuff like that because you made the point that, even where you are, the papers, you got to find the truth yourself, not always believe what's written down, and it's not, I found that, especially with social media the way it is now, and I didn't really have a social media presence, like I do until I started Everlasting Veteran.
Hmm.
And, I wasn't one of those people that was on it all the time. And, people get consumed and believe that, and the other thing is they have to be careful of believing these new AI videos and stuff that's coming out, where, you know, people can take, this video and copy it to their computer and make it seem like I'm saying something else, even, so people have to do their research and not take it at face value all the time. Sometimes, breaking news, whatever the case may be, maybe, that it's what it is, in front of you and it's correct information. But at the end of the day, you have to have perspective all around to make an informed decision on your own part and don't allow somebody else to make the opinion for you.
When I used to teach young Army officers, especially the ones who were on their way to staff college, people who aspired to being promoted major, half colonel, and onward. One of the things that I would encourage them to do, and this is when print journals were a bit more important and available than they are now, but I would encourage them to get their adjutant to order copies of different journals of opinion for them to have there in the office. So it should be done at government expense. But also, if you've got the spare cash for a subscription, I would tell them match two journals. If you get a liberal journal, get a conservative journal. If you get a conservative journal, get a liberal journal, so that you are sure that you're being challenged and your critical faculties are being challenged in both directions.
Yeah.
And that means that you have to pay attention to news outlets, websites, journals that don't agree with you. And I don't say you've got to believe everything they say, of course not. But you've got to pay attention to what they have to say, because otherwise you end up, there's a lot of talk about social media creating echo chambers where people only look at social media that they believe in.
Right.
And I see this, YouTube, I go to YouTube, it shows me all the political news I agree with. And that's not healthy for me. I have to continuously seek out stuff I don't agree with. Otherwise, I will become ignorant. And I don't want to be ignorant.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes into, and that's a full topic technology wise, for another episode with the algorithms and everything else of actually cleaning house with your algorithms to kind of start fresh, because whatever you click on, even if it's on Google, and you give permissions to other apps like Facebook, and your phone is listening, people wonder why they'll be having a conversation and then all of a sudden the advertisements, on your Facebook feed. There are things in place in which these companies have the abilities to do, and the algorithms are in place originally to fit the needs of the consumer. However, it can cause a very bad outcome if you don't understand that is happening with the algorithms. Because as soon as, like, if you just a political party, for instance, like if you follow a certain political party's agenda and your feed doesn't see anything else, and you're not aware of the fact that there's algorithms that, because you like this video or watch this video for a longer period of time, it's going to show you more of that liked videos. So it's very important for people to understand that, and I think a lot of people are aware of it, but you have to kind of take a pause and type in that search engine something else.
Yeah. And here's another thing. So I do work with my local community college, and one of the things we're working on is getting young people into tech and especially getting young people from challenged backgrounds, poor kids, into tech, kids who can't go to university. And and one of the things I'm working on is getting them to start working with AI. Because if AI is the big future thing in tech, and make no mistake, it is, then people who are able to get in, nobody's getting in on the ground floor of AI anymore. That was 10 years ago, but young people who get into AI now will be succeeding in this going forward. And I'll tell you something everybody says to me when I talk to them about these corners of cybersecurity, creative technology. One of the things they always say is, you know who I really want to employ? Veterans. Because veterans come in with a work ethic, they understand, they know when to get a haircut. Even if they don't get one, they know when to get a haircut. And they come in and they give me a day's work, and they're devoted to doing well. They understand what it means to be a good employee. And one of the things that of course the employers have to learn is how to be a good employer for veterans. And I know here in the UK, there are programs where you can get the Bronze Award for employing veterans, and a Silver Award and a Gold Award. And it's important for businesses to signal to veterans that they're welcome with an employer. And it's important for employers to earn those awards in good faith. But it's also important for anyone who would employ a veteran to do right by a veteran.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that brings me to my next point as far as, employment and stuff like that. And we briefly talked about it, and, the culture and climate within an organization, whether it's small business, big business, how one can affect the other. And applying, and we touched base, like you said, we kind of touched on it a little bit as far as those 7 questions, and then repeat to have positive forward progression and make sure what you're implementing is working. Do you think that the culture outweighs the climate, or vice versa? Whether, in the military, it's always a top down type of thing, right? Do you think that if there is a poor, toxic environment in a company or organization, do you think the culture can change it from the bottom up?
Toxic is an important word there. Toxic is another word for poison. And, if an apple's poisoned, you don't want to take a bite of the poison apple. You don't want to drink the poison. So if it's toxic, you've got to take out the poison before you can engage with it productively. What do I mean by that? Culture is the water through which we, the little fishes, swim. Everything we do is entwined with the culture in which we live, the language that we speak, the nonverbal communication, the way people dress. You know that phrase, they're dressed for the job you want, not the job you have, right? Signal to people. And of course, the punchline of that is, and that is why I came to work dressed as Batman today. The signaling of how you fit into your organization, the language you use. Listen, for soldiers, jargon is so important. TLAs, the 3-letter acronyms, are so important. I'm on a strategy group, mostly Americans, and we go on a Teams call now and again. And all of the American military people, they all use radio procedure on the Teams call. So they're all, they finish talking and they say over. And I'm thinking, wow, the culture is strong in you.
Yeah.
And there's that great saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can make any plans you like, but if the culture isn't brought along, you'll never achieve them. brilliant book on the subject called Turn This Ship Around by an American naval officer who, based on his experience with a submarine that he was given to command that had toxic culture and it was not achieving its objectives. And he talks about in his book the way that he turns the ship around, how he turns a bad boat into a good boat. And most of it is around culture. And most of it is changing a bad culture, perhaps a toxic culture, into a good culture. So you can change culture, and you contrast that in your framing of the question with climate. And the two are so tightly wired together. Everybody knows that if you join a good ship, if you join a good unit, if you go to work in a good company, you see people coming into work smiling in the morning, and they may leave late at night looking like they've put in 2 or 3 days' work, but they come in smiling again. We've all worked in places like that. I hope everybody's had that idea, had that feeling. And creating that climate includes having a culture in which people feel valued, a culture in which people understand how they fit into the organization, a culture that says we all look after each other. And so the climate and the culture are entwined. If you've got an organization that tolerates poor leadership or that tolerates people not being well looked after, then you will not have a good climate and you will not have a good culture. One of the things I was years ago, back when nobody had heard of EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I was what was then called the Equal Opportunities Officer for Sandhurst, big military academy. It was a big job. I was the advisor to the commandant, so 2-star general. I was some kid, and it was my job to ensure that the organization looked after our people. And so strong was the ethos that we as a culture look after our people that when we had a problem, when we had somebody who was not being treated appropriately for some reason by other people in the organization, you just go and talk to the boss. And I don't even mean I didn't have to go to the general. You go and talk to that person's boss, and it gets fixed. You mean we weren't treating the kid right? Well, we'll treat the kid right. And I wonder how that interacts. Now, have I just taken your division between climate and culture and completely misunderstood them? Because I've kind of melted them together.
No, I do think they intertwine. And then I think within, any, organization, or you could even stretch it to, like, say, the veteran community, there's the culture and climate. I do think they're intertwined in an aspect, but I believe that, there's a couple different, like, mentalities. I am for, and I believe that a top down type of mentality is the way that, things can be corrected properly and implemented. And, because at the end of the day, people that get put into the top positions are the ones that, are supposed to be the ones that are the top leaders. They're the ones that are supposed to be implementing the big decisions to make effective changes to the culture and the climate. I've talked to, some people that think that, it's a bottom down mentality, and, it's not the top's problem. It's, the people that, are below. It's their problem. The problem gets brushed off because nobody, I think, adequately knows how to address the problem of making effective changes to better the environment, bettering the culture and the climate.
So let me give you two different answers. And if I forget to do both, remind me. The book I referred to, Turn the Ship Around, um, is very interesting. One of the first things that the author says he did as skipper of a submarine with a difficult culture, he said, on a good ship with good culture, with a good climate, the sailors wear a ship baseball hat. We've all seen those, right? With the name of the ship on it and their submarine wings on it. And they use a ship lighter with the ship's badge on it and the ship's mascot on it or whatever. And he said, I'm going to start wearing my ship baseball hat, and I'm going to start using my ship's lighter, and I want to start seeing all of the officers, and then I want to see the petty officers. So you go to your divisions and get the petty officers to start wearing the ship baseball hat and getting a ship lighter. And that's what I see in a good ship. So that's what I want to see on this ship. And sure enough, he says, once the sailors started to take off their standard issue hat and spend their own money in the ship's store on getting a ship's baseball hat and a ship's lighter, they were invested in the ship's success. They felt better about their community.
Right.
They were modeling these behaviors. So that's one answer. And that is exactly what you're saying, isn't it? It's top down in the sense that the skipper initiates it.
Right.
It comes up from below when leading seaman Smith goes down and he says, here is my $15, give me a ship's lighter. That is basics, and that's bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, when I was a young officer writing doctrine manuals, one of the things I was writing about was mission command. And mission command, when I was a young officer, was this new idea, part of this new maneuver warfare idea. And it came into us from the American Army, who are all over this mission command idea. And the idea was you tell someone what you want to achieve, and you give them the freedom to achieve it. And it was a controversial idea in the old days. And I give a lecture, occasionally I still give it. And what it compares is the way a symphony orchestra works and the way a jazz band works. And it's my jazz warfare lecture. I'll give it anywhere in the world if they send me a plane ticket. The idea is that a jazz band does not go to play with a big score with pages and pages of music and a conductor pointing and saying, now you play and now you play, and waving the stick and all that. When Miles Davis recorded Kind of Blue, which is widely regarded by jazz people, I'm not a jazz person, but serious jazz people view Miles Davis's Kind of Blue as the greatest improv jazz album ever recorded. Miles Davis and John Coltrane and guys like that, they went into an old converted church on 22nd Street in New York City. And the guys all brought their instruments. And Miles would scribble a lead sheet with a couple of lines of music on it. And then it was, right, let's go. And the bass player plays the bass, and the trumpet player, John Coltrane, these brilliant, excellent musicians would play the music, and it came out just the way it needed to come out. You can buy sheet music of Kind of Blue, but that sheet music was created by having people listen to the album, listen to each track, and write down the musical notes. They did not go in there knowing what they were going to play, and they produced greatness. And that's what Mission Command is all about. And that is the way that we take the top-down aspects of leadership and we combine them with that brilliance that enables everyone to achieve their potential.
Right. Yeah, very well said. And I want to add to it to kind of bring it into, people that aren't, Miles Davis, kind of not even know who he is or jazz or anything like that. But, in a perspective of if everybody just took responsibility, right? And, it's everybody's problem, right? And yes, you have to have the top down, and bottom up, working simultaneously, I think at the same time, right? To be able to have better unit cohesion, you know, but I do think it starts from the top down initiative, like you said, and to get the ball rolling where, okay, it's supported, and I think that's the biggest thing when it comes down to, subordinates, lower level on the food chain, I guess you want to say, lower enlisted, lower officers, if you don't have, a higher leadership position, that leader is not showing support like we talked about before, and care for everybody in the unit and the unit as a whole. The lack thereof from the bottom up is going to be less there, and I think that's going to effectively uh, change in a negative way the culture and the climate simultaneously. So,
Correct.
I beautifully said in the aspects that you put. I didn't even think of it that way, and that's why I love having people on here and asking questions and getting perspective. So let's dive in a little bit into Mysteries of the Abandoned. How did that come about? And kind of what do you love about it, and what is your role, with the show on the Discovery Channel?
This is going to end up a lot less sexy than people think it is. So I've been on Mysteries of the Abandoned, also known as Lost Places in Germany, also known as Abandoned Engineering in the UK. I've been on that show since late in their first series. And for me, it was very straightforward. An old buddy of mine who used to make History Channel shows called me up and he said, Lynette, I need somebody to come in and help me out in a pinch. Can you come in and help me out in a pinch? And I said, sure. And I turned up, and this, for me, this is to some extent me being a mercenary, right? They need somebody to come and talk about military history. They're willing to pay me some money to do it. And I turned up, and listen, you go into a room. We mostly film Mysteries of the Abandoned in a cellar under the East End of London, with one of London's underground rivers under the floor, or sometimes actually coming above the floor. We have done this in a flood with me sitting on a raft, and an off-camera raft, by the way, just pretending that I don't notice the fact that the water level is getting deeper. And the producers, who have been all over the world filming these exciting places, they say, right, look at this picture. And sometimes it's a picture of someplace I've never seen before, and sometimes it's a place I know well. And they say, tell me what you see. And I tell them what I see. Early on in the series, Mysteries of the Abandoned was meant to be very mysterious. So, and as you can tell, I shout a lot. I have a very direct delivery. I'm fairly loud. I'm like this in real life as well. My daughters are really embarrassed by this. And she said, no, whisper it. Be whispering. It's Mysteries of the Abandoned. So sometimes I'd try to whisper, and then about 10 words into it, I'd be shouting and giving it the hand of command, because that's the way I am. And they asked me about this place. They asked me a bunch of questions. We do it for about 4 hours. And at the end of it, we all go and have lunch, and sometimes if they're really keen to get their money's worth out of me, they get me back down into that dungeon, and they point that camera in my face. It's like interrogation. I did my interrogation course. I mean, I left logistics and went into intelligence years ago, and I've done my interrogation course, and there are echoes, right? Because I'm sitting there in this cellar with a camera pointed at me, a bright light on me, and a producer I can barely see asking me questions, and another 3 hours of that. So it's Q&A, it's questions and answers,
Yeah.
and it's military history almost invariably. It's a lot of Second World War or Arab-Israeli wars, or Cold War. My doctorate is in the early development of logistics systems. So I can tell you all about logistics in the 17th century, but that's not what they want to hear about. Everybody wants to hear about Nazis. One of the things that if you've watched Mysteries of the Abandoned, is that I am fairly uncompromising in my view of Nazis in the Second World War. I do not swear because it's for a family audience, but I'm swearing in my mind and biting down when I'm talking, because I am not going to say anything even-handed about your Nazis. I take the Aldo Rain Inglorious Bastards view of the Nazis, and I'm fairly uncompromising on that. And that too is part of abandoned engineering. Mysteries of the Abandoned. We've got a really good bunch of experts. We almost never meet each other. The lunch break, sometimes we're sitting there sharing our food from the local eatery, but really we don't really talk to each other. But when I talk to the other people on that show, oh my gosh, are they red hot? We have serious academics down there. Nobody, they write Lynette Nusbacher, military historian, and that's fine. They don't tell you my experience. They don't tell you that I'm an intelligence officer. They don't tell you that I have a little bit of non-combat operational experience. They don't tell you any of that. They don't tell you I'm a veteran. And that's the same with all these other people. They have a little slug line on there saying strategist and author or whatever. These are red hot people. It's really fun. The good thing about this show, and I think what keeps people engaged, is that we're all there looking that camera in the eye. We're telling the truth as we understand it. There are no games. We trust our producers. We trust our producers not to mess us about. They're not going to give us a difficult question or a gotcha question and make us look like idiots. I'm sure that I have made incorrect responses to questions. I am sure that I said the wrong thing because the mind was going in the wrong direction, and that they have saved my ass by not airing me saying something stupid. And as a result, we get a good product out there.
Yeah. It really, you've really become a staple for the show. You really have, and a lot of it is you being your delivery. Is you put it as a matter of fact. This is the facts. In a roundabout way, you say, "Listen to me. I'm telling you the truth." And that's just how it comes across in your delivery. And it's a very charismatic. And I think I like it so much because you having your military background and having that a little bit of abrasiveness when you deliver it, I'm like, oh, I gotta listen. I have to listen. She's telling me the truth. I have to listen. And so I think it is a phenomenal job in what you do, and it's a credit to you and your studies, and your love and passion for military and history and everything else, and it's well delivered. And I just want to say I do appreciate watching the show.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate the positive energy, and I feel like we as a group who produce that have earned it. Let me also say it's a credit to every corporal who stood up in front of a room of officers or officer trainees who thought we knew everything, and taught me how to deliver a lesson. And it's a credit to everybody who has ever given honest feedback. Because one of the things you put your finger on there is that it's the authenticity that makes that show good. And that is true of so much of the rest of everything we do in the world. If you are authentic with people, they can sense it.
Right.
I used to work for a General Arthur Denaro, and he said something, and here I was comparatively new to the United Kingdom, and this very British general who barely opened his mouth when he talked, and he would stand up in front of the room and he would say, "You must be absolutely straight before evil," and I didn't understand it. He would say, "You must be absolutely straight with your people. You must tell your soldiers the absolute truth," he said in his own way, because your soldiers will know if you're lying to them, and they will never forgive you, and they will never trust you. And that's true with respect to educating people. I know that nobody's going to get a master's degree for watching abandoned engineering, Mysteries of the Abandoned. Nobody's going to get a master's degree for watching Secrets of World War II from above, which I do for National Geographic. Nobody. It's not that kind of education. It's better than that.
Right.
We are educating people by telling them things they need to know in a way that engages them. And that's the best way to learn.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's very important, and this kind of leads me into my next point, because I've we've started to kind of see it happen, in the United States, and I think across the globe. Of if you erase history, history will repeat itself. It's kind of an old saying, and I think it's very important to lay down the facts in a way that is engaging, where people can understand it and absorb it. You may not necessarily agree with, kind of like how you touched with the Nazis and stuff. Terrible times, in the world. And everybody, I think, feels the same way of when the time was going on in Germany. And it's one of those things where if you erase history and you don't tell it in a way where people can understand it and have the knowledge, at least just have the knowledge, and you erase the history, it's going to repeat itself.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important, and it's super engaging watching the shows, and it's a testament to, like you said, yourself, everybody else involved with it. I applaud all of them, because it is a very engaging show. Just to learn about the different inner workings of, just one building had, four different purposes, dating all the way back. And then there's a military aspect to it. And, it's kind of dark and haunting, sometimes, of what the purpose of the building originally was designed for, and people living in the area may have known it as, some simple factory, in its, latest times. But, when you dig deep into it, sometimes it has a dark past. And I think that's probably what's the most intriguing about the show as well, is really digging into the history, not just, the buildings and stuff, but the other episodes and other shows as well, really digging into it and portraying it in a light of, hey, we're not taking sides or anything like that. We're just telling you the facts,
Yeah, a building's a building, but if we can use the building to teach people the truth, that's important. Listen, when you look at what's going on, as we're discussing now, the Israelis have spent the last few months pounding the snot out of the Gaza Strip. And for some people, this is a mystifying idea. Why are the Israelis just absolutely smashing that place? Why are so many people being killed? How is this possibly something that a civilized country can do? Make no mistake, the Israelis are rough and ready, but they're a civilized country. And one of the things that I find myself saying is, if you understand the history of war, You understand that war is about destruction. This is Clausewitz said this in the late 1700s, early 1800s. War is about killing and destruction. William Tecumseh Sherman says to the merchants of Atlanta who come and say, please don't burn our city. He says, war is cruelty. You cannot refine it. He makes it absolutely clear to the merchants of Atlanta, the citizens who don't want their city burned, that he, William Sherman, is going to burn their city because it will save lives. It will end the war sooner. And stopping the war, avoiding the war, is something we must commit to and we must understand, because we who understand war understand what a horror it is. In Israel, the anti-war activists, if you look at a list of anti-war activists, the first 10 names are always general this, general that, general the other, because nobody understands the horror of war like a soldier or sailor or airman or guardian. And the leadership of people who understand war often have the word general or admiral in front of their names.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where, like I said, you know, people need to even just do their own research sometimes, you know, and history is history, you know, and things happened, and you know, you just have to absorb it, and you know, if you forget about it, you know, it's going to repeat itself.
And this connects to a point that you made earlier. People do need to do their own research, but we don't always learn how to do our own research.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, when I was at Brighton High School in Rochester, New York, in grade 10, 10th grade, and I had a research project to work on, I did my research, I wrote the paper, I probably got a C on it, and then for years, nobody taught me how to actually approach and archive primary sources, secondary sources, interviews, all of these things. And you're right that people need to do research, but they also have to know the difference between, and this is a point you made, between something which is plausible because it's deceptive and something that's plausible because it's true.
Right.
And as we get deeper and deeper into an information space dominated by artificial intelligence, which lies to us with a straight face, that's going to become more important, a more important skill. So you're right to tell people to research, but we also have to expect people to constantly upgrade and sharpen their research skills. And you got a day job, you got a family, I mean, I used to plunk down on the couch and watch, you know, cable news in the evening and rely on that to educate me. And when I was a young Army officer, I actually used to have my television on a timer, so that a mechanical timer, so that at 7 o'clock in the morning, it would pop on and give me the CNN news while I got dressed in the morning. And that kind of information flow from a trusted source, it's harder now. And it's a real demand to say, sharpen your research skills, because otherwise you will be deceived by some bot from a Russian bot farm seeking to weaken the West, seeking to disintegrate NATO, the strongest alliance in the history of democratic nations, to further the agenda of Vladimir frickin' Putin. It's a big demand.
Yeah.
But here's, you know, when I point at Vladimir Putin, I am pointing at a real threat. So it's incumbent on us to put our money where our mouths are and sharpen our skills, do the work, and not just accept what people are trying to tell us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing, I see a lot of times, people come up to you, and oh, did you see this on TikTok? I'm like, really? Like, and that's, I have a joke like TikTok news, because you can put a lot of times what's happening is there are those AI features, and they're making these videos and putting them on TikTok because that's what a lot of people are using. And then there's the whole thing with the app base of control from a different country, generated from China, that TikTok is able to view and see and whatever with, whatever platforms that you use to try to, deceive and, be a deceptive type of platform. It's a very dangerous culmination of things when people rely on just social media. Um, and I don't dive into it enough. With my logo, everybody thinks it's a podcast. He's got headphones. The real truth of it, I put the headphones on there, because sometimes we need to slow down and just listen to the person to our left and to our right and absorb. And I wanted to make sure that I created a logo that is simplistic, but at the same time had a meaningful objective on my part, and it was fitting the fact that it's for a podcast. you know we just need to slow down and listen, and listen to everybody around us, listen to in the news and stuff, make our own choices. Don't allow just one, like we discussed earlier, don't allow one network that is aligned with your objectives to tell you what the quote truth is all the time, because you're not going to have that perspective.
I agree. And listen and analyze. So you're right with respect to listen. And listen doesn't just mean that what goes in my ear goes straight into my brain
All right.
and ends there. We need to listen. We need to analyze. We have to be critical.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be devil's advocate for ourselves sometime and say, what if the opposite were the case? And being critical and being analytical is work. It's hard. It requires time and effort, like anything else that's worthwhile. We have to commit to it. It's not
Yep.
easy.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand too, and put your big girl and big boy pants on and say, hey, listen, somebody may give me constructive criticism based on what I'm saying and not get offended by it too. You know, that's the catch 22 to it, is you also have to be able to receive, you know, what others are telling you. You may not like it, completely, but you have to listen and analyze it and take it for its value, because it is a perspective from somebody else. I try to do it as much as I can, especially with this podcast, because I am forever learning. And if you say, you know what, I'm going to stop, I know everything, you're shortchanging yourself, in life as a whole, because everything is evolving at a rate faster than I think, even our parents, even thought was going to be possible, and in the short time, I remember, my older, stepkids and, my daughter and stuff, my wife and I brought up, you know, oh, dial up internet, where you have like the dial tone, and, they're just oblivious to that, even that, or I remember going to my grandparents' house, and the television was like a furniture fixture. It was like, the times have significantly evolved, technology wise, significantly, where, we kind of got to take a step back and understand that, to your point earlier, through generations, we can't right the wrongs for our past generations, but we can move forward in more of a positive outlook, and make it a better future for generations to come.
Listen, what else is worth living for? We have such a short time on this earth. And even if you believe that you'll leave this earth and go to a better place, we're on this earth with a responsibility to make an impact, to be who we can be, and to do what we need to do. Why would you not want to leave this place better than you found it? It's like a campground. When you're in the Boy Scouts or the Girl Guides, one of the things they always tell you is leave the campsite better than you found it. That is true of this world, and it is incumbent on us as responsible human beings to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Lynette, I appreciate you coming on. We're going to wrap things up, and I hope to do some follow-up episodes, if you have time. But I do appreciate you taking your time to be able to come on, Everlasting Veteran, and I appreciate everybody's support. And if anybody's wondering about the dog donations, getting future service dogs out, we were able to get 5 out in the first year of the startup of Everlasting Veteran to 5 veterans. And you want to become part of that and helping, you can go to everlastingveteran.com. And we want to welcome podcasttables.shop to the sponsorship program, providing this beautiful table in which I'm sitting at. And I have additional seating to my left and right to be able to have guests in studio here in Connecticut. And I want to say thank you to Rockin' Frenchies and Meadow Ridge Wimes and Danes, the foundation, the pillars of Everlasting's dog program, the 2 breeders that I've partnered with to get dogs out to veterans. Dr. Lynette, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been great, Ryan, and we must do this again soon.
Absolutely. Everybody, this is Ryan Landry, your host of Everlasting Veteran.
From the cannons, when the smoke clears, we're still standing.
Bulldog 3-3, patch 8 November, fire for effect, over. Enemy OP on Hilltop, over.